All righty. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Intro to Native Plant Garden Maintenance with the Community Nature Connection Training Institute and Antonio Sanchez. Great to have everybody this afternoon. Gonna let folks flood into the virtual room and we'll be getting started.
Celeste, while we're waiting for folks to come on into the virtual room, is it cool? People let us know where they're tuning in from and if they have a specific native plant that maybe they're having a problem with in their garden or something like a specific maintenance question that they have. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. So as everybody joins us this afternoon, why don't you go ahead and type your name into the chat. Let us know where you're joining from today. And if you have a specific native plant that you have questions about or a specific issue that you're coming into this class today that you'd love to see addressed, go ahead and share that with us in the chat and we'll get it going.
Victorville.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. My name is Celeste Gasparic and I use she, her pronouns. I am the Director of Training and Impact with Community Nature Connection, and I'm joining you today from home in Northeast LA, the ancestral village of Otsunga of the Tongva Gabrielino peoples. And if you're just joining us, please share your introduction in the chat. And we'd love to hear your name and your pronouns, where you're joining from. You can also add an organization if you're here representing a group today. And we also encourage you to share your ancestral land that you're joining from. And I'll pop a link into the chat in case you need to look that up. And then Antonio asked if you would share a native plant that you either want to learn more about how to maintain in the garden, or if you're having issues growing it in your garden, and go ahead and share that plant with us in the chat as part of your introduction. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this link in the chat in case you want to look up the ancestral land that you're joining from today. Looks like we've got a good group of folks flooded in. So we're gonna get started and we'll begin by acknowledging the land on which CNC operates as the ancestral lands and home of the Tongva, Gabrielino, Tataviam, and Chumash peoples. We recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture and pay our respect to elders past, present, and emerging. Community Nature Connection strives to create partnerships and collaborate with local tribes to expand equitable outdoor programming to all. And if you are unfamiliar with our organization, Community Nature Connection is a nonprofit, community-based organization serving the Los Angeles area. Our mission is to increase access to the outdoors for communities impacted by racial, socioeconomic, and disability injustices by eliminating existing barriers through advocacy, community-centered programming, and workforce development. And today you're joining this class as part of our Training Institute. The Training Institute is one of our programs that provides training and workforce development opportunities aiming to increase knowledge and skills in the outdoor field. So thanks so much for being here today, and I will stop talking really soon. I want to direct all of your attention to the Q&A box. I am going to definitely look through the chats that everybody has sent to bring up questions for Antonio. But as your questions come up during today's class, if you could type them into the Q&A box, it's a little easier for me to manage all the questions coming in. And you can see other people's questions that come in the Q&A box too. So if somebody asks a question and you really want to know the answer to it, you can also upvote it or add to it. So it's a little bit of a interactive space in the Q&A. So go ahead and throw any questions that come up in there. And just a reminder that the recording of today's class, as well as any resources that were shared today, will be shared with you all in a follow-up email. So you'll get slides and resources and the recording in case you want to study up after today. So without further ado, I'm very excited to have Antonio Sanchez here today. He has joined us for a lot of different trainings with Community Nature Connection, and we're really excited to have him back for the Intro to Native Plant Garden Maintenance class. So thank you so much for being here, Antonio, and take it away.
Right on. Thanks, Celeste. I can see you in the top right of my screen, Celeste. So I'm going to ask you for a thumbs up whenever I need to.
Sounds good.
It's on. I'm excited to be here virtually. Yeah, I love this class. I always have a hard time getting my class started. I love this class because it's so easy to buy plants or to get plants for free, right? You go to Home Depot or you go to Theodore Payne or you pick some up like at your local nursery center, or you grow them yourselves, however it is. And then after a year or two, the native plants don't look so good. No me gusta. I think native plant maintenance, I think native plants, sometimes our relationship is a little bit like people. Basically, our relationship with native plants is almost like a partner. The first year or two is usually really easy. There's usually some physical things going on, partying, lots of fun. And then after a year or two, it gets really into like, how does this person, why is this person not talking to me for a day? All those relationship things that you need to work out. And that's how I think maintenance is in the garden. It's just like a relationship. So a part of this talk is going to be about my own personal relationships and how I need to go to therapy a little bit more. I'm just kidding. But part of it is getting you guys to understand, I think, that relationship between yourselves and the plants, and what relationship they already have here, being a lot of them are at home, and how we need to treat them and maintain them. We're going to cover all sorts of like traditional garden maintenance stuff too. So here's my email. Can you see my cursor when I use this little cursor? Am I the only one who sees it? Celeste, or could you see it? There's a thumbs up. Cool. So here's my email. If you guys have any questions, it usually takes me like 5 to 7 days to get back to somebody, but please send the email if you have any questions. And so today I'm going to go over just a few pointers on general native plant gardening. And then I'll give you an introduction to what it is to be a California native plant. I'll talk about the 3 seasons of maintenance. There might be 4 seasons on our calendar. A lot of native plant people and other folks say that there's 5 seasons in California. For me, for maintenance, there's 3 big seasons. That's how I'm going to break down today's class. We'll talk a little bit about, not a little bit, I'll talk a lot. You guys are probably going to start throwing up after I talk about irrigation. That's going to get really complicated, but it doesn't have to be. Talk about fertilizing, pest problems. And if you guys have any questions or complaints, please, as Celeste said, direct them to probably the Q&A is the best spot, like Celeste said. That way she can monitor and let me know what's going on. And then before I start, I think it's super, super important that I give thanks to all sorts of folks who I've been able to work with and who have been a part of my life, and that I've learned from where I work now. I work at the National Park or National Recreation Area here in the Santa Monica Mountains. I get to run the native plant nursery here, and I also get to manage the seed collecting and seed storage program. We do a lot of really cool work in Santa Monica's, but I've gotten to work with so many cool farmers over the years. My first native plant job was up north in Sonoma County at Cal Flora Nursery. I used to work at the Theodore Payne Foundation. I used to own my own native plant nursery in Ventura, Nopalito Native Plant Nursery. Me and my primo, my cousin, and a good friend, we sold and grew our own native plants for over 4 years. And I used to run the nurseries at Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden. I love that place. Now California Botanic Garden. I used to work at the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. There's a lot of, I guess next time I'm just going to list how many places I haven't worked at. I mean, it's a lot faster. That'll be a lot faster, a lot less boring. And my friends over at Chia Cafe, and to native folks before and native folks now who have given us non-native Californians a lot of amazing information. There's just so many people that I've been able to learn from, and they're not all listed here. But because of all the great work, I'm able to offer this class to you, and hopefully you guys can get something out of it today. And if you don't, it's free. So you guys just got to waste 2 hours. So it's not that bad. So like I said, I do work at a national recreation area. I don't work for the national parks, but I work for a company that's basically the friends of the national park. So I want to invite you guys to check out this little link right here. If you just look this up, Eventbrite Samo Fun. If you guys have the ability to come out to visit us in Calabasas, Newberry Park, we do free events basically every week where we offer free plants to people if they help us grow stuff in the nursery. Recently, we've been out collecting milkweed stalks. We do native seed collecting. We're going to be doing pretty soon, and we do propagation and native food classes, etc. So you guys should check this out if you're all interested. If at all interested, and everything is 100% completely free. And then we do have a 7-week horticulture training program coming up. Oh man, this is where I'm gonna say, where do I complain? This is my complaint. This is the wrong date. Who's doing this class? Whose PowerPoint is this? This is my PowerPoint. I forgot to change this class. So this next free training that we have is going to be in April. I invite you guys to email me if you're interested. It's a pretty intense once a week course where we show you how to collect seed. We show you how to do cuttings, clones of native plants, etc. So there's my email if you guys are interested. Cool. So maintenance. What are we talking about today? California native plant garden maintenance. So hopefully some of you all who are in this class have planted some native plants before. And I'm not rooting for this, but you guys have probably killed some native plants before too, if you've gardened with native plants. That's usually the first thing that happens is people kill at least a few of them. So this class will be super, super good if you guys have ever gardened or put something in the ground, whether it's in your apartment, in a big pot, or landscaped with it as a profession, or inside or outside in your home. If you've installed and worked with for a few years, or even just 1 year, a native plant in the garden. I also want you guys to understand, hopefully we all understand. If not, it's all good. I didn't know this just a few years ago or 15 years ago, but time goes by fast, that we're in a Mediterranean zone in California. And that sounds kind of goofy. It kind of sounds like stupid. Like, why am I talking about that? But the native plants that you guys are going to go buy or that you're going to receive are almost all directly collected from native nature. And native nature has been raining during the winter and being dry in the summer for thousands of years. So when you do something for thousands of years, you remember that. And this is way different than corn. Even though corn's originally native to Mexico and other parts and spread out to other parts, it's not, the corn that you guys buy in the supermarket is definitely not a native corn anymore. And so that has been domesticated. It's really easy to grow in gardens. And I think a lot of people take these native plants home and they say, oh, I've grown corn before, I've grown tomatoes. This native plant is going to be just like that. And it's completely opposite. Our native plants haven't touched domestication almost ever. And so while corn has gotten, if you want to call it the wildness or the nativeness beaten out of it, native plants, almost everything that you buy or use is going to be 100% remembering what it was 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. So super important that we kind of reset our minds when we're doing native. And Mediterranean is the biggest. The Mediterranean zones are wet from November to about March, not all the time, but that's when the plants get the water. And then they're dry from about April to about October. So that's what we're going to encourage you guys to do in your gardens, is to keep them wet at that time and then to keep them dry at that time, right? So wet from November to March and then dry from April to October. I'll get into the details when I do get into the irrigation. So hopefully you guys have had some success with native plants too, whether it's white sage or ceanothus or manzanita or whatever. If you guys have, it'd be really cool to hear in the Q&A what plants look amazing in your garden. And it'd be really cool to hear what plants you guys have killed so we can maybe address some of those issues. Hopefully, if you guys are doing native gardening, you have some mulch in your garden, and all mulches are the way to cover bare earth. So it's 2-3 inches. Could be like shredded bark. It could be newspaper and cardboard. It could be gravel, anything that covers up the earth, the bare earth, and usually keeps the water in and then keeps the weeds from growing. So today, mostly what I'm going to cover for maintenance is going to be coastal sage scrub, chaparral, and oak woodland type plants. Those are the plants that if you live in Northeast LA, if you go down into San Diego, if you go into Santa Monica, these are most of the plants that you'll see in those native hills and those native areas. So those are the ones that tend to look the best and are the easiest to maintain in native gardens. And remember, you guys don't have to do any of this at all. There's no need to do maintenance in your garden. If you guys feel this is too much, I completely understand, because in native nature, there's almost no maintenance being done. You guys could probably guess the biggest maintenance that's done on a every 5 to 10 to 20 year basis, sometimes a little bit longer, is usually fire. So there's ways that we can replicate fire in our garden, and I'll show you guys how we do that. But it's up to you. You know, you guys can take it or leave it. You know, my advice or my ideas. But what I'm trying to do today is to save you guys some money by not killing so many plants and keeping whatever plants you do have looking better for a little bit longer. And then it's always nice to learn from my mistakes and from other people's mistakes too, right? So again, if you guys have any questions, throw them in the Q&A so we can check them out. And so what is a California native plant? We describe a California native plant. There's kind of two, for me, there's two definitions. One, it's in the political border of what we know as California today, the state of California. And that border goes up, you know, to Redding, all the way down to Tijuana, out east to Nevada and Arizona. And those are plants that were here before Europeans arrived. So 400, 500 years ago, right? We know that these plants were here long before that. Or it could be a plant that, if you want to get more scientific, is in the California floristic province. And that's a little bit more technical. It has to do more with weather instead of politics. And that goes up into Oregon and it goes down into Baja. But either way, that's what we call our native plants. And that's what I'll be referring to as a native plant today. We have all these beautiful redwoods. We have these high deserts. We got these beautiful alpine meadows that are under snow for like, 4 or 5 months out of the year. And they only see the sun for, July, August, September. None of those I'm going to be talking about today. Those are amazing, beautiful plants. But for most of Southern California, what has worked well and what will probably work well into the future as climate change keeps happening is our local oak woodland, our coastal sage scrub, and our chaparral type plants. And remember, all these plants are almost all being pulled first generation from native nature, and they remember wet winters and they remember dry summers. So for us, watering during the dry season, I'm going to recommend that you guys water 2 to 3 times a month. So I'm going to, can you see me, Celeste? Can you see my face? Yeah. Okay, cool. So I'm in a federal building too. I have to wear a mask. So I'm going to hold up on my hand so you guys can, hopefully you guys will see this. I'm recommending that you guys water this many times. So April, I'm going to say twice. That's 2. May, twice. That's, I can't hold up. My hands are weird. So May, that's 2. June, that's 2. July, that's 2. August, that's 2. That's 10 times, right? And then I'm going to add September and October, 2 more times for each. That's 14 times. That's about what we're recommending. So think to yourself, are you guys watering more than 14 times a year during the dry season? If you are, you should ask yourself why. You're almost being disrespectful to your native plants. And I want you to develop a relationship, hopefully, with your native plants. They don't need it. They haven't needed it for thousands of years. They've been here without it. They appreciate it. I bet you a lot of them really appreciate it, but why are we giving them any more than that? So let me show you guys a website I love to use. On the right here, you see my little, this is CalFlora. This is a picture from CalFlora. This is the natural distribution. So this is where naturally this golden yarrow occurs. And all these little blue points, if you go onto CalFlora, you can click on these little points and it'll show you like usually a GPS point or show you like an herbarium sample or whatnot of where and who saw this point. And these are more scientific. They're not really iNaturals. Did you guys are familiar with iNaturals? This is a really cool program, but this is a little bit more scientific. So this will show you where golden yarrow grows. And this is all across the state. To me, this looks like a map of like the Sanchez family tree. Like this is, we're everywhere. Sanchez's are everywhere across the state. Basically, wherever there's a Circle K or a liquor store, you'll find us. And basically, wherever there's a liquor store, you're going to find golden yarrow. It's everywhere. It's up in the hills. You can go up to Santa Cruz. You can go up to Fresno. It is in a lot of places. And we know, or I know from my experience, that plants that occur in areas like this, so this is a widespread, a wide ranging species. this guy's usually really easy to grow in gardens. And I think part of the reason is because in its genetics, it is accustomed to growing in colder areas, hotter areas, clay, sand, rock. It could tolerate fresno. I'm not saying that this guy went out here. I'm just saying that this species is adaptable enough to tolerate, and you'll see it. Sometimes you'll be in LA and you'll be buying a golden yarrow, and who knows where that golden yarrow came from. Maybe it came from a grower in Watsonville and they collected it from native nature out here. That plant usually translates very easily into a garden in LA because that plant, we know that species is a wide-ranging and a very adaptable species. So let me show you a very close cousin. This is the Alvarados. I'm just kidding, it's not. Hopefully no one's last name is Alvarado. This is a less diverse. So look at the distribution of the Alvarados. I'm just kidding, of the seaside yarrow. So again, very, very closely related. Eriophyllum, Stachytifolium. I'm going to switch screens. Eriophyllum, Confertiflorum. So these are basically like gorillas and monkeys, chimpanzees. They're very closely related, like humans are in the Homo genus, right? Related to gorillas and monkeys. This is in the same genus, Eriophyllum. But for whatever reason, Cadifolium always hangs out by the ocean. If you guys know this, if you've been lucky enough to see this in native nature, I adore this plant. Every time I've ever seen this plant in native nature, you can always either see the ocean or you can hear the ocean. That's how close this guy is always to the ocean. I've only seen him a few times, but every time he's always next to the ocean, right? You can either hear it or you can see it. So what happens when we take a plant like this and then we take it to downtown LA? It's probably a little bit hotter than these immediate coastal areas. The soil is probably a lot different. This is definitely rock or sand. Downtown LA or Pasadena is going to be usually a lot heavier clay, especially where we put our homes that tend to be flatter, so they're in heavier clay soil. This plant just does not translate very well away from its natural habitat. And I found this guy grows beautifully for about a year or two in your garden. He looks amazing. He starts flowering within 6 months. And then after 2 years, almost always it's dead from overwater, from heavy clay soil, wet, it can't breathe. And I found over and over again, if we have a plant that occurs in wild, like a widespread species, they're so much easier to grow than plants that occur. This is kind of widespread, but it's the distribution from where it grows away from the coast is just nothing, right? It's always near the coast. So it's something going forward that if you guys have had a hard time growing a plant, and I'll show you guys what I mean by when we look at white sage, is white sage has a very specific distribution. And if you don't replicate that distribution or what those characteristics are in nature, where the habitat that it's in, it's going to be hard to grow in your garden. So I want to focus on 5 plants today, mostly because these are the easiest to find, and you can find these at Home Depot. You can find these almost anywhere. I'm not promoting Home Depot. I think I've said Home Depot like 5 times already. I'm not here to promote them. If someone here works for Home Depot though, hit me up with that email. I might, I've sold out for worse. I might do it. But these guys, they're easy to grow. And if you are a beginning landscape designer, or even just a native plant landscaper, these are almost always on the top of your list of things to use. So let me introduce them to you so we can talk about how to maintain them. So this is a smaller plant. These are perennials. Perennial usually lives for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. They're usually not that big. This guy gets about 2 feet tall, about 3 feet wide. And this guy flowers probably starting about March and then straight into May or June. So he's a perfect little plant for most small, like downtown LA, Pasadena gardens, like those little parking strips. This one's Penstemon Margarita Bop. This makes a beautiful cut flower. I've seen bees just get tucked in there. You can see the back of their butts kind of just shaking. Really cool plant. This one is best in full sun, where if you guys were to see this, where this plant grows in native nature, it's almost always an intense, rough sun, rocky sun, but it grows in all across California. So the distribution is really wide. Some penstemons can be hard to grow. This is probably the easiest penstemon to grow. And if you look at the distribution on California, you could see it's just everywhere. So this guy doesn't mind clay soil as long as you keep the clay soil dry. I'll talk about that in a second. And again, this guy is good for birds, hippies, bees. I don't know. That sounded funny when I wrote it. It's not that funny. And then there are some other plants that look exactly like it. So you guys might hear Penstemon heterophyllus or foothill penstemon. You guys might hear Penstemon blue gem. You might hear Penstemon electric blue. With no disrespect to any of those plants, those are all basically the same. Some of them have slightly different leaves, slightly different flower colors, but for us, we're going to treat them all the same. They're basically the same size, and they flower the same way or the same time, and we're going to maintain them the same way. I love planting this in 5-inch or 4-inch plants instead of buying the 1 gallons or the bigger pots. I seen this guy at Lowe's the other day for 20 bucks in a 2-gallon pot. There's no reason to plant that big. You guys could buy 4 of them for the same price at a smaller native plant nursery and get much more space coverage, right? And like a lot of our plants, this guy tends to look best when you plant them in groups of 3 or 5, right? And this right here, Ishi, I will talk about that in a second. So the next plant is Island Snapdragon. This is more of a bush.
Antonio, sorry, can I interrupt you for a second?
Of course,
There was
yeah.
a question that came in clarifying about the deadheading. Is that recommended for blooming?
Yeah, we'll talk about deadheading. That goes into the maintenance part. But yeah, deadheading is, so hopefully you guys enjoy it. And if some of you don't, I'm sorry, but that's just how I am. But I compare plants to people, and blooming is basically a plant cutting its hair, putting on makeup, putting on its best dress shirt, and going out to basically have babies. There's no other reason for a plant to look this good except to attract other things, right? They're trying to attract basically a mate. Whether it be a bee, a butterfly, blah, blah, produce seed. The seed's going to come from all these beautiful flowers. So what happens a lot of times, this is so disrespectful, but what happens a lot of times is after we have kids, we don't start to get our hair cut so often. We don't go out so often because we got the kids. The damn kids take so much of our time. So what happens with perennials after they set seed is they tend to not flower, and it's really smart of the plant. But what happens with deadheading, which is just removing these flowers as they get spent, right? These flowers will eventually dry up and they'll want to produce seed. At that time, we remove them, and I'll show you in another picture where to cut, but you'll cut just the flower, not the plant, just the flower, right? If you guys can think of a rose, you think of the rose stem, eventually that rose will form rose hips, the little fruits. All you're going to do is cut the stem, the tiny part of the stem that has the hip. That's going to fall off anyways. That's the baby. It's almost exactly like saying it's the placenta that comes out of the mom. That part of the plant is gone, but the plant remains. So all of these are going to produce seed. So we remove these aggressively as they dry up. And usually we get 1, 2, or sometimes with penstemon, we can get 3 flushes of blooms, right? But you have to do it as the plant is still actively growing. You can't let it flower in March and April and go, beautiful, it looks amazing, and then come back in July, 2 months after the last flower, and the plant has already set seed. You can remove the flowers, but you can't expect more flowers. The plant has already in its head thought, oh, I've already set seed. There's no reason to set seed anymore. I've already had my kids, we're good. Like, I'm just gonna hang out and just Netflix, right? I'm just gonna hang out. I don't want to go to the club anymore. We were good. So what you want to do is remove these aggressively. It's different times of year for different plants, but for most native plants, it's going to be spring, summer, and early falls when we do our deadheading, right? So I'll show a few more pictures about that later in a little bit, Celeste. So yeah, so just to go back to, so heucheras, yarrow, penstemons, there's so many, and there's so many non-native plants too, like lavender, asters that we deadhead and that we can get a ton more flowers of. And if you don't deadhead, you're usually disappointed by how short the flower season is. The flower season can be really, really short on some of these plants. So it's a way to extend the flower season for sure. So this one's a small shrub. This guy is found on the Channel Islands, only the Channel Islands. But for only being found on the Channel Islands, which is not very widely distributed, he's actually really easy to grow. He tolerates clay soil, a drip system. If you grow him down a hill, the gravity of the hill will take him down and he'll just kind of ramble for 5-10 feet. You can also use him here as a small hedge, This guy flowers almost all year. I would say at least 6 months. So you can keep them at 3 or 4 feet. If you keep them this small, though, eventually you're gonna, there'll be a season where there's not too many flowers because you're cutting him, right? And you'll be cutting the stems that want to produce flowers. So I wouldn't expect this many flowers if you keep them this small all the time. This looks amazing in a wine barrel. He looks good. It's good for hummingbirds. There's so many good uses of this plant. I love this plant. Then there's deergrass. This one you guys could see up and down the I-5, 101 freeways, Caltrans. I don't know what, they must have like a deal with God to use this plant because Caltrans overuses this plant. They need to find a new plant. This is everywhere. It's really easy to grow. It tolerates shade under oak trees and it tolerates full sun out in Riverside. It's easy to find too. What I do, I'm gonna show you some pictures, is we cut it back. We cut it back to about 6 inches, or after 2 or 3 years, you'll start to see all this green. Eventually it will start to turn brown, but you'll have green on top of it. So you have this mix of green and brown. It would be like eating some frijoles or some beans on a plate and then leaving like 3 or 4 of the beans and then doing cactus on top, some nopales, and then eating most of the cactus. And then eventually you're just gonna have leftovers, right? And there'll be new stuff too. So how do you clean the leftovers? You take a rake and you can just rake the dry stuff and the dry stuff will just come out. Or if you want to reset the whole grass, you can just replicate fires, which is what a lot of native folks, and a few still do, is set fire to this plant. This is a basketry plant right here, and it's highly prized for these straight shoots. So we can cut it straight to the ground. I would leave about 6 inches. I would definitely go very, very close to the ground. I'm talking 6 inches. So cutting it close, and this can be done any time of year with this grass. But the best time of year to do it is in the winter and the spring when the plant wants to actively just go to town, wants to grow. I'll talk more about the maintenance of this in a second. I know I got ahead of myself. Yankee Point. This is, this Yankee Point. This is what a lot of folks will use for either ground cover or a hedge like the Island Snapdragon. This guy flowers a little bit almost all year, but really the heavy is February, March, April, kind of those months is when most of our ceanothus flower. The thing about ceanothus is that they love to have room to spread. They're going to get big, right? So you guys want to make sure you plant this 6, 8, 10 feet apart. This guy wants to grow wide. This guy doesn't mind clay soil, full sun. I've seen him look amazing in Simi Valley under the smaller oak trees. Just a nice, easy to grow plant, really good for butterflies. And then hummingbird sage. This is a plant, again, if you deadhead this, so on here, I'll explain to you what deadhead is on here. So here's the mom, right? This is the mom just living her life, having a real good life. And then one day she's like, I want to have babies. How do I attract a mate? So let me throw up these flowers and attract some hummingbirds. And the hummingbirds come. I can't see any flowers here. Maybe this one. You guys see this right here? See how this is a little bit brown? And this happens with sages. Sages throw up a huge stalk and the bottom flowers first, and then the middle flowers. And as the middle's flowering, this will start to dry up. And at the top is going to be the new ones that haven't even opened up yet. So I can see right here, there's 1 or 2 dry whorls. They're about to go dry and the top is still good. You wouldn't cut this down. I'd probably wait another week or 2 and then take this all the way down. Not the leaves. I would just take the stem all the way, remove that stem all the way down to the leaves. What this does is it tells the plant that it did not get pollinated, it did not produce seed. And what does the plant do? It wants to have babies again. So it goes to the club, it gives another outfit, and it goes. This happens with so many of our native perennials, and it's the trick to keeping one of the tricks of keeping our native plant gardens flowering for so long. We can get this. I have gotten this to flower from December all the way into June, just by watering 2 to 3 times a month. And then by pruning, by deadheading aggressively every 2 weeks, I walk through this patch and we're deadheading, right? I'm removing whatever, because these are different phases. This guy will be ready in a week. This guy going to be a while till he's ready, right? So we come in every 2 weeks and we just cut what may have gotten pollinated and we get rid of it. So it's a really good plant to cook with. It's probably the easiest native plant to incorporate into your diet. It's an easy plant to find, really good in light sun or part shade. Light sun is like coastal sun or filtered light. And then it does really well in part shade too. This looks great in that pot too, in a wine barrel. Excellent plant, such a beautiful plant. Cool. Any other questions right now, Celeste?
Let's see. Maybe let's continue on a little bit.
Perfect.
I think we might get to some of these.
All right, cool. So when I do my big class and my long 7-week horticulture, we go over these tips. And I don't think I want to go over all these tips with you guys because we just don't have enough time. And there's other things I want to cover. But so here's Calflora. I think it's super important to understand what Calflora is and how we could use it in our gardens, right? If you guys have a buckwheat that didn't grow in your garden and you go on Calflora and you look and it's Eriogonum undulatum, cool. And you look to see where it's at and it's always at 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 foot elevation past Mount Baldy. And you guys are trying to replicate that in Riverside. Yes, it's native to California, but we can understand why Riverside and Mount Baldy aren't exactly the same conditions. They're really hard to replicate Mount Baldy in Riverside. The easiest way to replicate Mount Baldy in Riverside would be to do light shade, to do it on the north or east side of a house, and then to mound up the soil, right? To find a little area where you could have some better drainage so it's not flat, it's more mounded. And then you start to replicate what Mount Baldy is instead of what full side Riverside is, right? So I think a few that I want to cover on here are this. This is such a dumb story, but these black widows. That black widows, you always hear about people getting bit or getting stung or whatever black widows do. I have no idea what insects do about black widows just being poisonous, right? And it's true, they are. But I don't know anybody personally, and not that I know everybody, but I don't know anyone personally who's ever got stung by a black widow. And I really don't know anyone who's ever been killed by a black widow. Black widows are everywhere, inside your house, outside your house, in our neighborhoods, right? And so what are they doing there? They're usually munching on insects and just minding their business. So what happens if you lift up a brick in your backyard and you find a black widow? The black widow usually leaves. If you follow the black widow, it usually still goes away. It doesn't want to mess with you. But what happens if you get that black widow and you start poking it? Eventually, it will want to fight back. And so what does this have to do with native plant? I have no idea. The black widows are exactly like our clay soil in our gardens. Clay soil is amazing. Black widows are amazing. They're doing amazing work in our gardens if we just leave them alone. Clay soil is the best soil you can have in your garden. It's full of nutrients. If you guys hold clay soil in one hand and sand in the other, you could see the difference, the components. There's more organic material, there's more nutrients to feed your plants in clay soil, but it stays wet. And so we put a drip system in our clay soil and we poke the black widow. And by poking the black widow, I mean, we water the clay soil every 2 days and then we water it again. And then we water it again. We're just poking at that black widow. And instead of letting it dry out and breathe, we keep poking. And so what happens eventually, it will suffocate the roots of most of our native plants. So if you have clay soil, I completely disagree with everyone who says native plants can't do good in clay soil or that they need good draining soil. To me, that's a complete, almost 100% of the time, it's incorrect. What they don't want is wet clay soil. So we should not get rid of every black widow in our backyard just because they're poisonous, but we should leave them alone. And we should stop watering our clay soil. If you have clay soil, pull way back to how much you water, and you're going to see your plants are going to be so much happier. The other one I want to talk about is winter watering. This doesn't have much to do, or we wouldn't do much of this year, but winter watering is huge. And you guys might think, or maybe it doesn't make sense, but winter watering, that's when our plants get their water, right? And so last year, so let's not 2021, but 2020, last rainy season, we didn't have any rain, I don't think, until, was it late December, early January. And so you had all these new garden plants in your landscape that hadn't received any water, and they're used to getting water, or their populations are healthiest when they get winter water. And so what I like to recommend is you water starting November 1st, you start watering your garden deeply. This has nothing to do with the summer water I said. Remember I said every 2 weeks or twice a month, you guys should water your plants during the summer. I'll show you guys how much to water. and it's very little. You're actually not trying to water your plants. You're trying to refresh them. During the summer, I like to think of watering as your plants are waiting in line in Disneyland. You guys ever been to like Knott's or like one of those places where you wait in line and then they give you a mist like every hour or like half an hour, it just comes on like, oh, damn, that feels good. That feels great. That's what we're trying to do in the summer. We're trying to basically mist our plants and refresh them. What would happen if you guys were in Disneyland and a shower came on? That you'd be pissed off. That's what we do during the summer with our plants, with these drip systems and these irrigation systems. There's dump water on our plants. They're not used to it. They don't need it at that time. They don't know what to do with it. And then imagine 2 hours later, someone else at another ride, the Matterhorn or whatever, I don't know, Splash Mountain or whatever, you're in that line and they turn on the damn shower again. That's what we're trying to avoid during the summer, is showering our plants. We don't mind misting, but we avoid showering. But during the winter, that's when we water deeper. We're actually trying to get water into the roots, trying to replicate rains. So the long and the short explanation is, however much you water during the summer, we double that during the winter. And that's starting to replicate these rain showers that we're getting at this time of year. And it's super important. I know it doesn't sound like it's important, but remember, these plants are used to being wet during the winter and they're used to being dry during the summer. So if you're going to give them water, it should be in the winter, especially if native nature with droughts or climate change is not able to supply it. Cool. So I have this list at the end, and I'll go over a few more of them that I don't feel like I covered enough.
Antonio, can we do a little follow-up on watering question?
Yeah, I have a whole like few slides on irrigation, but yes, if it's something I'm gonna cover in a second, I'll go over it then.
Okay, so like what I am understanding is, okay, 14 times in the dry season, so just twice a month, but then we want to be kind of replicating the rainy season during the rainy season, even if it's not raining. So someone asked, like, they got 10 inches of rain in their garden in December, but it hasn't rained a drop in January. Should we be watering like weekly in January?
Okay, yes. Let me get to two things, because I don't know what I'm doing as far as technology goes. Can you see this strip of like this chat strip on my thing?
Chat strip? No,
I'm the only one who sees it. Okay,
your PowerPoint. Cool.
Can you see? Okay, you can't even see my pictures, huh?
It just says Google Photos.
Okay, yep. See, that's Antonio doesn't know what he's doing. Cool. So I'm gonna stop sharing, and then I'm gonna start sharing over here. Cool. So I'm gonna get to a few pictures. Yes. So that's good. I bad Antonio. Okay. So when it's dry, like 2 years ago, right? 2 rainy seasons ago, I start November 1st irrigating those landscapes deep. November 15th comes around, deep, unless you get a good rain. And you know, good rain, because everyone busts out there. Like, how come people have these jackets? Like, we live in New York. You see all these like fancy little jackets all over. Like, come on, guys, you live in Southern California. So whenever you see that, or like people running to get new windshield wipers, that's a good rainstorm, right? And we don't have to water for a few weeks. We're good. But there are months sometimes there that we go without rain, from November to March, and that's when our plants can use it the most. Think about a young population of, think about kids. Kids, they really want their food, and they need, right? When you're an infant or a young kid, you need that food or that breast milk when you're young. As you get older, you're 10, 15, you can usually go for a lot longer without it, right? You can make it through those periods of drought or famine, if we're talking about humans. And then as you get older, it gets really hard to go through drought or famine as a human. So what we're trying to do for our plants, especially the young ones, is we're trying to get them through, especially the 1, 2, 3-year-olds. We're trying to give them a lot of water during the winter. And if native nature doesn't provide it, starting November 1st, twice a month, you deep water your plants until we get rain. This last rains that we have, I wouldn't water until probably March. There was so much water. We haven't seen water like that in years, right? That was an amazing rain. So I don't think there's any need to water till about mid-February to March. And even then we might not need to, because we might get another rain. But before that, you bet that we were watering November 1st, November 15th. We did get a rain. I think it was like around Thanksgiving. So skipping that time, right? But twice a month, if we don't get good rain showers. And that way, our plants have a good root system. They're nice and wet. And once the sun comes in July and they're pulling these plants up, the plants they have enough to make it, right? They have a good root system and they're drought tolerant. Think of it as a marathon. The marathon is being run during the summer by our plants. They're going for months without water. You cannot train for a marathon during the marathon. You have to train for the marathon before. And our plants train by going through good rainy seasons. And if native nature doesn't have it, usually if we have small enough landscapes, we can provide it for them. So hopefully that's enough of an answer right there, Celeste. Can you see these photos, Celeste? Okay, cool. So I'm going to go over these quickly. This is deer grasses, a planting of deer grass right here. Let's see. Here we go. It's my little boy. So what I want to show you first is how small plants, the smaller you plant, or the smaller you, when you buy a plant and you install it, the smaller it is, the better. The older it is, the worse. So check this out. This is the coyote bush that came in as a weed. And yes, coyote bush grows a little bit faster than manzanitas, but honestly, a good young manzanita will put on 1 to 2 feet of growth a year. This is a manzanita back here. This installation's been in for over 4 years. This stupid manzanita hasn't moved an inch. They put this in as a 24-inch box. They probably paid retail. A box is probably $200 to $400, depending on the size of this manzanita. And yes, it looks amazing, but this guy is not moving. He still hasn't moved. This guy flew in as a seedling and he's taking off. There's a few photos that apply for this talk, so sorry about this. I'm going to go through a few of them. Let me see. Here's another manzanita. Great, beautiful. It hasn't moved an inch since they planted it. It has stayed still for 4 years. I would go back and get my money back. But here's the thing, and this is one of my tips. When you guys plant a big pot, I think Celeste might have heard this. If you guys heard me talk, you guys probably think I have an obsession with my mom's feet. So this is my mom's feet story. My mom, may she rest in peace, descansa en paz. She used to wear tacones. When we were growing up in El Paso and Juarez, we used to go over to Juarez to see the family. My tia used to have this really cool cantina right there in the strip in Juarez. And my mom used to love to wear her high heels. And she would wear high heels so often that her feet would take the shape of those high heels, right? They started to get crunched and her feet were chucked up. Sorry, Mom, I love you, but your feet were, they remembered the shoe. So go back to the first time my mom ever wore high heels, her feet weren't like that, right? After a week of wearing high heels, her feet still weren't like that. There comes a point where your feet basically start to remember that. And plants, especially long-lived plants like manzanitas, are like that. So this manzanita in native nature wants to be 50 to about 125 years old before it dies. That's how long these guys live. So we spend the first year doing a cutting and put it in a pot. It roots out. In 6 months, it's ready to plant. That's the time we should plant it. Or after a year in a 1 gallon plant, that's the time we should plant it because it hasn't memorized the pot yet. It hasn't gotten used to this pot. You put it in the ground and like my mom's feet, taking off the tacones, it will go right back to its natural state. It'll grow into the soil. It'll be amazing. But what happens is we get blinded by sexiness and we see these beautiful, huge manzanitas. And I don't know why you do this because like $200 to $400. I know why they did this because this is a new housing installation. They wanted it to look pretty. But half of these guys are dead. It's so sad. So you plant this and it's stuck. It's like taking the shoe off my mom and telling the foot, go back. It won't. It will take years for this plant to get rooted in and to start growing because it's been in a pot for so long. At this point, it's probably in a pot for 3 or 4 years to get to that size. So please, half of our battle is done even before we get plants into the ground. This is a beautiful maintenance of a non-native rosemary and a native sage. I'll show you guys a video in a second about how to maintain sage. This is purple sage, Salvia leucophylla, but I think these guys are doing an excellent job of maintaining the Salvia leucophylla. There's a non-native erigeron, a daisy right here. But this is what I think native plants can be. And I think this is probably the future of a lot of our developments and a lot of our areas in California is mixing non-native hopefully non-invasive plants with a lot of native plants. And I think this is a perfect hedge of purple sage, and they're hedging it, they're boxing it. They're hopefully letting it flower, and once it flowers, they're removing the flowers and then keeping it at that shape. And this is an example of a wrong place or the wrong plant for this spot. So if you were to look up where this plant is native to, this is Arctostaphylos. This is a manzanita called emerald carpet. Emerald carpet has genetics from Northern California and from higher elevation, more kind of snowy and rocky areas that do not, and more acidic soils too, that do not translate to Southern California. This is such a bad plant for Southern California, but it works in Northern California. And a lot of us copy what Northern California does, because that's where not all, but a lot of native plant stuff was done in the 70s and 80s. And so, okay, cool. Emerald carpet works up there. It should work down here. It's completely different. So what most of us are using are more site-specific, locally adapted manzanita ground covers. And the best one is probably Carmel Sur. That's almost bulletproof plant. It's such a great plant. And here is another manzanita that they charge probably $200 to $300 for. What a piece of poop, poor guy. Cool. So let me go into, this is going to be good. Are you ready for this, Celeste? This is going to be a disaster. All right. I know that there's some sort of like button I need to push to like optimize my, where's it at? Oh, here it is. Optimize for video clip. And I'm just going to need from you, Celeste, a thumbs up. I can't even see you now. A thumbs up that you can see this, but I can't see you, so I don't know where you're at. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I can give you a verbal. I can see your window with the video.
YouTube window.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So I'm gonna let you guys know winter and spring. So I would say about Christmas, so about December to about February. That's not winter to spring. I just made that up. So December to February is the best time to do almost, I would say about 80% of our native plant maintenance. So we are in the time. So you guys should hang up. You should cut this. You should just leave this talk and go do maintenance on your plants. The reason that's so good is because if you guys think of the hills in August and September, they're dry. A lot of them are dormant. They're wanting to go to sleep. If you do maintenance on a lot of our plants at that time, you'll kill them. Like they don't want to grow. They're not used to growing. Remember, for thousands of years, they've had those 6 months of heat and they just rest. They're waiting for the rain. And it's a beautiful adaptation in California. But what happens in December? We usually have rain. We definitely have slower, colder days and shorter days. And the plants, sometimes I've seen it happen without rain. They just wake up. And so a sage that looks dead, all of a sudden in December has a ton of new growth. And so here, I'm gonna show you guys how to maintain this sage that I think looks okay, but I think needs a lot of work. What I wanna do here is in December and January, when this guy is ready to grow, he's shown that he is ready to actively grow because there's a bunch of leaves on the stems, up and down the stem, almost to the base, almost to the soil. You can see leaves just popping out. What I wanna do is I want a deadhead. So I'm gonna remove these flowers, which would happen anyways, right? This would just fall off. The birds would land here and these will break off. That's the kids leaving the house. And this is the mom. And I want to maintain the mom. This time of year, I can cut the mom 2/3. So 66%. I'm going to cut her down hard. So you guys are going to see that on this video. You can just find this on SamoFun, Eventbrite, or SamoFun YouTube. Our page is a disaster, by the way, so it might be hard to find, but it's there. So I'm going to do a purple sage. And then we're going to show you a white sage. It's a very short 1-minute video. And let me make this big. And my screen just froze because that's how good my computer is. Okay, vámonos. Here we go. Celeste, could you guys hear that song?
Yep.
You need to get a new song. That sounds horrible. Okay, so a few things to talk about on that. That we can do, if you have a non-native lavender, you could do the exact same way. That's basically lavenders and native sages are basically the same thing, the woody ones. So we're removing the flowers, and you guys can go look that up. You can stop it. Removing the flowers to clean the plant up. And if we want to shape it, because sometimes they get woody and open, we're cutting it down. We're taking the plant from the top and then moving it down by half, stepping back to look at it, and then taking it down to the final about a third of what we started with. And we'll do this every 2 to 4 years with plants that need it. We shouldn't really do it every year with woody plants like this. That's asking a lot of our woody plants. What I like to do when, I'll go into this a little bit more in a few slides. What I like to do when we cut our plants this hard is I like to reward them. I like to give them something back because we are basically replicating what would happen in a fire. And when a fire comes through, it usually deposits some sort of ash or a little bit of nutrients into the ground. So we're cutting these plants hard. And if we're going to do it again and again in this plant's lifetime, we need to reward that plant. And so what I do is fertilize the plant. We fertilize with something that's basically not even fertilizer, it's just compost or worm castings. You guys can make your own compost, make your own worm castings. But if you have mulch, all you do is move the mulch away. You take 2 huge handfuls, 1 in each hand, and you put a handful on each side, right about 1 foot or 2 feet away from the base of the plant. And then you work it in real quickly. You could just cover it back up with the mulch, water it in. And if you do it this time of year, we should have a few more rains. And what does compost do? Compost slowly feeds plants. Not a high nutrient, it's not very high nutrient, but it gives the plants a lot of really good micronutrients, and it will feed slowly over months, right? So instead of a liquid fertilizer feeding right away, which is what a lot of folks do with like roses and whatnot, we want to feed the plant slowly over time, right? So we want those nutrients to be available to our native plants in February, March, April, May, and June. So 2 heaping handfuls, 1 on each side of the plant, about 1 foot or 2 away from the base, never on the neck of the plant. Always think about fertilizing the area instead of fertilizing the plant. And we do it this time of year. It'll have months to get wet, and that's when compost works the best, is when it's wet and it starts to warm up. So that's a bushy, that's like a small bush, right? And so the next one I want to show you guys is, let me skip over this one. The next one I'm going to show you guys is how to cut our softer perennials. And these are ones that grow from the ground, right? They emerge from the ground. So these are plants like California fuchsia, solidago, which is solidago. Somebody told me solidago California goldenrod, Matilla hot poppy, milkweeds, yarrow. There's a whole bunch of other plants that you plant one, and you usually have multiples because they grow underground. They form these little colonies. Hummingbird sage, mugwort. So this is a really cool video that one of our interns, oh sweet baby Jesus, I forgot her name. Don't tell her that I forgot her name. That's horrible. She's cool. That she made, and she's gonna say her name, I think, right now. Can you still see this new video, Celeste?
Yes, and it's Izzy Lopez.
It is the what? Sorry.
Izzy Lopez?
No. This is not Izzy. Yeah, but yeah. Man, that's horrible. Jamie. Her name is Jamie. That's so bad. Is this being recorded? Can you cut this out of the recording? Anyways, so this is a short 1-minute video on how to prune our rhizomatous native perennials. Here we go.
Hi, my name is Jamie, and today I'm going to be showing you how to cut and maintain California fuchsia, or Epilopium canum. First thing to know about your California fuchsia is that cutting back should never be done to plants less than a year old. It also grows by rhizomes, meaning it grows underground. Because of this, we cut back hard in preparation for the fresh spring growth. These are some of the tools we will be using: some hand pruners and shears. Since we're going to be cutting back hard, I'm going to be using the large shears to get rid of all the dead wood. Now I'm going to be using the smaller pruning scissors to be more precise. Here you can see where the new growth has started and the old growth we're going to be cutting off all the way to the ground. So here you could see the new growth that we left. It is a lot smaller and more manageable than the old growth that we cut off. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned to learn more about native plant maintenance for your garden.
All right, so hopefully we can work out that editing of that video where I remember Jamie's name. Jamie is awesome. So that is how we do our perennials this time of year, the ones that grow underground, right? Because most of them that grow underground, like that fuchsia, like that solidago, like mugwort, like milkweed, they had their great season in summer and then fall. And usually they're kind of dry and kind of, some people would say ratty looking this time of year. But if you peek through there, you'll see at the bottom some new plants emerging, right? And that's what Jamie was cutting to. And I remember Jamie's name. She's a great intern. I distinctly remember her name. Oh man, it's overkill. So we're cutting to the ground this time of year. What happens if you take a plant like that and you cut it to the ground, let's say in March? It'll still be fine, but you might lose some of the flowers, right? So we want to do it December to February. And like Jamie said, we definitely want to let a plant that's in its first year, we won't do any of this to it, right? Because cutting to the ground is really rough. That's replicating basically a fire again. And so again, we'll reward these plants with handfuls of compost, one on each side. And you can do this every year with these plants if you want, because this is way different than a woody plant that's above ground. Almost everything on that woody plant's above ground, and you're cutting that wood hard. This has all this new growth coming from the ground. So these take pruning yearly if you like, but I still like to reward them with that compost at this time of year. And the last one that we'll look at is, this is dividing. This is a perfect time of year to dig up your native irises, your native coral bells, hummingbird sage, yarrows, blue-eyed grasses, a bunch of other stuff, and we can divide them in half. We can divide them in fours and make new plants. So what this does is help us make new plants, and it also makes big, maybe what you might think as ugly plants, it makes them a lot tighter. It makes them a lot more probably pleasant to the human eye, right? So here's a quick 1-minute video on that. And Jamie, she's such a great intern. She's amazing.
Hi, my name is Jamie, and welcome back to our series on landscaping with your native plants. Today, we will be dividing and replanting some of your perennials. Always make sure to choose plants to divide that are healthy and actively growing. Divide the plants when they are breaking dormancy in winter and spring. Make sure that the plants have been watered a few days before dividing. Today, we will be dividing blue-eyed grass. To dig up the plant, dig it out from multiple angles. Dig down as far as possible. Before we divide the plant, we need to acknowledge that we just uprooted this plant from its home. We also took off some of its roots. We need to make sure there's a good ratio between the plant and the roots, so we're going to give it a little haircut to allow for new growth. We are now ready to divide. If you plan to replant your blue-eyed grass back into the ground, cut the grasses from the bottom into clumps from 2 to 4. From here, you could replant these into pots to divide even further, or plant them back into the ground. Stay tuned to learn more about landscaping with your native plants.
Cool. So can you hear me? Celeste, I'm so bad at technology.
Yeah.
Right on. I'm gonna cancel myself. So those are basic, but hopefully you guys can see and understand that we can cut most of our, I think what people look at as flowering or prettier native plants, which would be like the penstemons, the sages, the yarrows. All those things can be pruned, and we probably should prune them in our landscapes. And we want to do it almost always when they're actively growing, right? Because a lot of that maintenance that we're doing is super aggressive. So we want to make sure we do it at the perfect time. And the perfect time for these is this time of year, right? The Christmas, so the December, January, February, getting into March, but knowing that in March, the plants might not flower because it is a little bit late for those things. So I'm going to switch over. This is going to be a really awkward transition. Let's switch over to the PowerPoint. and see if you have any questions that I could fill the dead time with for a second.
There was a question, it was a fuchsia, right, in the first video with Jamie.
Yeah.
And so there's a question about, had the fuchsia already gone to seed before
Yes.
the pruning?
Yeah, we're talking about, so when we prune, this is how you guys should think about pruning. You guys can do whatever you want, but this is how I think about pruning. It's like cutting your hair. Like you can cut the split ends of your hair. You can cut 10% of any plant anytime. If you guys just have like a little, like a foot, if you have a 10-foot plant, like a ceanothus, and a foot of it is grown in, and you just need to you can cut that. And that's that's not even maintenance. That's just a deer walking by and like the big butt of the deer just breaking the stem. That happens all the time. What we're talking about is these heavier cuts where we're actually cutting to maintain more flowers, or cutting for shape because we don't like how something looks, or we're cutting it to the ground because we want fresh growth. So that needs to be done at specific times. And for us, we do that fuchsia after that fuchsia has flowered. After it's flowered, it gets really dry. And then come winter, it wants to grow again and it'll wake up from the ground. And that's when you cut it to the ground. So that guy had already flowered, yes.
And then Caitlin says her fuchsia is still blooming now. So when would she cut it back?
So 2 questions. I don't want to get too much into this because I could spend all day talking about it. But is it a new plant or an old plant? So is it older than 2 years old? And does the plant really look good? There's a difference between it blooming and it, it's alive, but a lot of it's dry and it's just part of its blooming. So those are the questions I would have. Because most fuchsias aren't, if they're flowering right now, they don't look amazing. It's like the last, it's like that last mile of the marathon, right? Like, or I guess a lot of people get that second win, but you know what I mean.
Okay, so yeah, she says it's a new plant.
Yeah, if it's a new plant, it makes sense because a lot of new plants are off rhythm, right? They still remember the nursery rhythm. So the first year, almost nothing applies. And that's why we don't encourage, that's why I tell you not to do any of this the first year. Let the plant get settled, let it get into its state. The second year is when it's had its roots and it'll usually start to go dormant at the right time. At that time.
Okay, so just wait till next winter.
Yes, yeah. You can lightly shape it. You can take 10-20%, off. If it's 3 feet tall, you can prune about 6 inches off of it. We don't want to go hard on a plant like that. It's still new. It hasn't created its roots. Its roots. Damn, how many times am I gonna mess up English? The raíces, the roots. I'm actually gonna write that down. That's a good word. The roots have not been established, and what we need to cut that hard is we need a plant that has its roots. So you know what I mean. So the second year is when it's had a chance to provide it or to do that. If you do it too hard the first year, you could lose the plant.
Awesome.
Cool. Celeste, are we doing a break or you want me to power through?
Well, we have lots of questions.
Okay. Maybe. Okay. I don't need a break. I don't know if you want to take one or if we want to get folks, and I can stay here and answer questions. It's all good.
I think let's continue on with the content so that we do have enough time for Q&As towards the end.
Perfect. So here's another picture of a Matilla poppy, or a picture of a Matilla poppy. These are old stems that flowered last year. And here's some new growth coming from the ground. So we would take this Matilla poppy this time of year and cut it right to the ground, encouraging all this new stuff to come up.
Oh, we're not seeing your screen right now.
Yep. I told you, Antonio's, this could be a disaster. You imagine when I do my classes alone, Celeste, you know how bad they are? Okay. Can you see that?
Yes.
Cool. So again, this is the Matilla poppy, the older stems. And this is the newer leaves that will be stems eventually coming from the ground. A way to keep this tidy and looking a little bit cleaner is to cut these to the ground. And then let these guys come up, and that you'll see happening this time of year. And so when we deadhead, when we remove flowers, or when we're lightly shaping a plant, we're only taking a small percentage of the plant. So we can do that almost any time of year. So I would like for you guys to understand and really appreciate that the plant that you bought, let's say it's a white sage plant, that is the mom. When she flowers, she's trying to make babies. So those babies, I hate to say this, but we can get rid of those babies whenever we want, but we don't want to cut the mom whenever we want. Okay, so if we want to have more flowers on a penstemon, that's the babies we're going to work with, right? But if we want to shape the mom because we don't think she looks good, or like the plant, the penstemons will open up sometimes, we need to do that at a specific time of year. So small deadheading or small light shaping, small amount of the plant, we can do that any time of year. Our heavier cuts, we need to know exactly what the plant's doing, and we need to know when to do that, right? So for a lot of those perennials and those sages and things like that, we're going to do those this time of year. And so the rainy season is the season that we do most, November through February. This is when our plants that are asleep, they're waking up. And this is when we prune those things back hard. This is a hummingbird sage that we prune back hard. So you can see all the dead stuff here, that all these guys right here. And I'm telling you, this is the time of year you cut hummingbird sage to the ground. If there's holes in your hummingbird sage patches, or it's not growing fast enough, as long as it's over a year old, this is when we cut it to the ground. Because what happens to a plant that grows underground when it loses its above ground growth? It signals it to go sideways, especially the correct time of year. This is the time of year we do it. And guess what? I also reward my plants with compost at this time of year. This is when we try to do all of our installations. So November through March, we try to plant almost everything into the ground, new plants. And if we want to talk a little bit more, slightly more advanced, if you have a plant that isn't growing, like a 1 or 2 year old plant that hasn't really been growing, it's a good time to pinch those plants. I could take the tip and pinch them, and it'll usually stimulate the plant to grow a little bit more. This is the time of year that we would divide almost all of our grasses, our coral bells, the heucheras, the blue-eyed grasses, those types of things. And then for bigger things, try to stay away from anything big being cut this time of year, especially the ceanothus and the manzanitas. We don't, or I don't cut any of those, any of the big cuts, right? 10% always okay, but the big cuts, we want to wait till it's dry on the ceanothus and the manzanita. I'll tell you guys exactly when that pruning stuff comes in, or how we prune ceanothus and manzanita. In the fertilizing, this is what I use. I use worm castings. You guys can make your own compost. This has served me well. I love using these things. And all I did here was replicate, because I went to school for sustainable farming, and I studied a little bit of sustainable ag. And there's a lot of really good low water or dry farm grape vineyards. There's a lot of really good local lavender farms in California. And there's some great olive orchards too that are all, or not all, but some of them are pretty sustainable. They don't bring a lot of stuff from offsite besides their water if they're stealing it. And they use very low impact fertilizers. And so one thing that I saw these olive orchards and these lavender farms and these grape vineyards doing, the more sustainable ones, was applying compost at this time of year, right? So a little bit later, February and March. And it has worked well for me because grape, lavender, and olives are basically native plants. They're from the Mediterranean. They're definitely not native to the state of California, but they remember the cycle of California. They remember flowering during spring, fruiting during summer probably, and then going slightly dormant during fall, and then waking up again in the winter. So I've just replicated what happens in those places, and it works really, really well. I found that if you guys have more woodland type plants like oaks, heucheras or coral bells, tules that are more riparian, mugworts, they tend to appreciate either more earthy mulch. So if you're going to cover the ground, a more wood or more shredded bark mulch, or adding compost if your soil is very light. They love, so think about where a mugwort, and not all, but some of the coral bells and oaks, where they exist, they drop leaves. It's a little bit shady. And when it rains, the water hangs out there a lot longer than it would where ceanothus and most manzanitas are native to. And so they tend to have richer soils. And we like to replicate that in our gardens by adding compost, not every year, but certain times of year, especially if you're cutting back, or if you see that your plants look like they're pooping out, that could be a reason, is that you're keeping them too dry, or you're keeping them too nutrient deficient to where they would normally be in a nice kind of a leafy, shady area. And so that's the only fertilizer I use. The other fertilizers are more for nurseries, and I don't think I even need to talk about them. Those are all liquid fertilizers that we use because we want the plant to have the food quickly. And all these other fertilizers, we want the plant to have access to the fertilizer over 3 to 6 months. And that's what these, the compost does. It feeds the plant over a long period of time. So pest issues with native plants, we almost never have any pest issues with most native plants, but it's very site specific. I'll go into a few of the roughest ones. For me, I think this guy is they're a little bit undetected, and they are rough on plants. So these are voles. I don't have a picture of vole. I've killed, unfortunately, plenty of voles. So what voles are field mice. And I would encourage you guys, if you have plants and you've done everything right, and your plants still don't grow, I would encourage you to check out that it might be a vole. And the reason, the way you'll know you have a vole is if you walk around your garden and it feels kind of like there's a little bit of holes in there. Not a gopher. You could tell a gopher hole. Gopher holes are very distinct, right? They look like little like lava, like little explosions. You can see all that fresh earth, or after a few days it dries out. But these voles, the easiest way to see them is if you not to feel the activity is you can walk, and the soil has a lot of give, right? They're kind of, there's tunneling down there. And what they are is like little mice going under and creating tunnels. Or you can see like an exit wound, like a bullet hole. You can see about a 2-inch wide exit hole where the mice come out of the ground. And these have, I think they usually don't kill plants, but what they do is they stunt plants, and they're creating all these holes and these galleries, basically like these little cavities inside your soil, and they're aerating the roots, and they never really let the roots get established. You could pull a plant out after 2 or 3 years, and the plant has no roots because the voles have just been active around it, never killing the plant, but just making that plant suffer. Usually you'll find voles close to natural areas. So if you live close to a hill, or to an area that has a lot of open space, you might find some voles there. There's some pretty cheap ways online on how to kill voles or trap them and get rid of them if you like. We started using this in the park, and we like this. We don't use this just for voles. We use this for gophers as well. And this is called Vole King. And it's this little steel, this little mesh that is perfect. It's very flexible. It's easy to put on the roots, and the voles can't get in there. Sometimes when you use like chicken wire, the voles can get in. The gophers usually can't get in, but the voles, because they're so small, will get in the chicken wire. So this works really well. It is a little more expensive, but it has worked well for us. And the other thing that's worked good for me is using more woody species. So instead of like a soft, let's say like a soft monkey flower or a soft daisy, like an erigeron or a diplicus, using something woodier, like a sage or a woodier perennial, like a monardella. Those tend to be more they're tougher, and the voles don't get at them as easy. You don't see them suffering above ground as easy. And I know I've seen plants when we do stuff by seed, that the plants, I don't know what it is about their root system. When you do something by seed, the root system is amazing, and we can't replicate that with the nursery pot. So I've seen us plant, I'll say like an erigeron, beautiful erigeron, plant it, and it just get hit by the voles, and it doesn't die, but it just doesn't go anywhere. And you can throw seed of the same plant, and that plant looks amazing. So there's something going on with the naturalization and the natural root structure of a plant that's grown by seed that the voles don't seem to get to as much. Gophers are rough. If you guys have small gopher problems, they're fairly easy if you live at home or if you're at home a lot to trap. If you work away from home, they could be hard to trap. But there's some really good videos online on how to trap gophers, and it's kind of fun. But they do a lot of damage. Deer as well. So here, deer and rabbits, what has worked well for me in the past is using this or something like this. This is Bobex. And all this is rotten eggs and a bunch of horrible smelling stuff. This smells nasty. If you want to piss somebody off, get this on them. It is gnarly. But this works really well to keep small groups of rabbits and deer away. The smell is kind of trying to replicate bobcat like spray. And so they think that there might be bobcats or large predators around. And so they tend to stay away. The only bad part is, of course, it costs money and that you have to keep applying it every 7 to 10 days, especially if you live in a foggy area or if it rains, it'll wash right off. And ground squirrels, unfortunately, becoming way more common in Southern California. And the squirrelinator, this is probably the easiest of all these. The squirrelinator works so easy. You just get some walnuts, you get a squirrelinator, and you could have 2 to 5 squirrels in there within an hour. But what you do with them, unfortunately, that is up to you, but they're pretty easy to catch. Some other ones that are not as many mammals are powdery mildew is probably one of the most common, especially now. You guys can look at this hummingbird stage right here. You can see this powdery mildew. And this happens for 2 reasons. One, the area is too shady. So it's consistently year and month after month shady, and the plant never really gets to grow out of it. Or it's a rainy season and it's kind of foggy and it's just a temporary thing. It usually happens now, December, January, February. And once it warms up and the rain goes away, the plant usually grows right out of it. But if you see powdery mildew in July on your hummingbird sage, it's in the wrong spot or you're watering too much. You're keeping your leaves too wet. There's a few other things that honestly, so aphids aren't usually a problem with native plants. We see them on milkweed, and the easiest thing to do is leave them alone. They almost never cause any problems on even the milkweed. So I would just leave those alone. This is a big one. When we plant, especially ceanothus, manzanitas, too close to each other, the air can't get through there. Think about if you guys ever been on a beautiful hike up in our mountains, like the San Monica's, Pasadena, where there's chaparral, there's a lot of airflow through there, right? And a lot of our landscapes will plant stuff way too close where there's no airflow. We get a foggy day, we get overhead irrigation, and then we start to get this mold, this mildew that's in the leaves of some of our plants. So I want to encourage you guys to open your gardens up by not planting them so close, because I have seen that happen a lot with especially ceanothus and manzanitas that are planted too close together where there's no air coming through those plants. We want to watch out for dusty conditions too. If you live near a farm, or if you live, if you have an unpaved driveway, or even kids just walking, going to school and kicking up dirt, it can happen where if you have wet leaves and dust is being kicked up, you can get a combination of those two will affect sages, penstemons, a lot of our drier chaparral and coastal sage. We see it happen all the time. And one thing we can do to start all over with some of these plants is cut to the ground, right? We can cut our plants straight to the ground and start new with like elderberry, willows, redbuds, deergrass, etc. So let me skip these guys and I'm going to go to our green season maintenance. Let me check in with Miss Celeste and see if we got about 35 minutes. Celeste, we got anything that we should talk about right now?
We have questions. I'm trying to categorize them a little bit, but we have more questions on watering and pruning. So I don't know if you want to take those now or if you're going to.
I think we'll wait. Yeah, because I got irrigation. I got the whole thing.
Cool.
Okay, so green season maintenance. So this would be as the rain is dying off. Here's the most important thing. If you guys don't take anything else, I would please take this. In native nature, there's a hard stop when it stops raining, right? Once in nature, the plants know when the rain stops and they immediately switch in to summer or dry season. In our landscapes, we can keep them in a green season for a lot longer than happens in nature, because we don't ever let them realize that the rain ended. We're not trying to recreate rain showers, but we are trying to keep them what I call flexible, right? So if you keep your plants flexible by watering those 2 times a month, that's way more than plants in native nature get, right? And a lot of them will stay flexible, they'll stay green, they'll stay flowering. So that's what we want to do. So I usually tell people starting March or April, we're watering twice a month. And we're doing that through the summer to keep our plants flexible. but we still are deeply watering at this time of year in case there isn't enough rain, right? So like I said, probably mid-February to March, if we don't get another good rainstorm, I would start watering deeply again, just to make up for less rain in case we didn't get enough rain. And this time of year, during the green season, so February to May, we're going to be deadheading all those hummingbird sages, those penstemons, the asters, etc. This is the time when all of our weeds come up. So we're actively weeding. Think of it this way. If you guys are watering twice a month and you have weeds coming up, those weeds are stealing the water that you are giving twice a month. That would be like my kid only eating twice a month, and I give him a big bowl of beans, and then all of his friends come over and share that bowl of beans. I would tell those friends to get the hell out and let my kid eat, because I'm giving him I'm only feeding him twice a month. So you should treat weeds as pesky, unwanted neighborhood kids. I love the neighborhood kids, but not when I'm only watering twice a month. So all of those weeds are growing. They're not growing because it's dry. They're growing because it's wet. And we reapply our mulch at this time of year. To get a little bit more advanced, anything that's rhizomatous and young, so a yarrow, the easiest example is yarrow and hummingbird sage. If you guys have a new yarrow or a new hummingbird sage, this is the best time of year to pinch it back. A lot of the first year, second year plants, they flower right away. And I like to pinch those back. I like to cut those flowers to the ground because it makes the plants spread sideways. If we let that first flower come up, usually the plant wants to take a break, and sometimes it'll even just kind of go to sleep or semi-dormant for the year. We want our young plants to grow sideways. We don't necessarily want them to be having kids. This time of year, so I'm going to say March through about May, after they flower is when we start cutting and shaping our ceanothus, our manzanitas, and our coffee berries. So most ceanothus, we're going to see flower February, March, April. Manzanitas a little bit earlier, but let's just call it March and April. Those are perfect times to prune our manzanitas. Not 10%, you can do 30%. You can start to shape. Someone had a question about Ceanothus arboreus. If you want to shape your Ceanothus arboreus, your island Ceanothus, you wait till after it flowers, and then you can go to town on it. I'm talking about taking a dense shrub and making it into a tree. Or you can start espaliering it. You can start doing almost whatever you want to it right after it flowers and before the hot dryness really, really sets in, right? So we're doing that after the plant has flowered, after the threat of a lot of rain has passed. Because once we do these big cuts on like Ceanothus and Manzanita, we don't want to leave these stems wide open. We don't want to leave them open because they usually don't heal very quickly, and we don't want any rain or any pathogens to get in there. But once that wet season is passed, we just go to town on those guys. And be careful with desert plants. Desert plants are way different than the plants we're talking about today. So desert plants like Abetalon palmeri, Sphaerosia ambigua, even the non-native desert ones like Salvia gregii, we don't cut them during the winter because remember, they don't remember necessarily, they don't remember wet, cold chaparral, right? They're usually semi-dormant during the winter in the desert. When they come out of their dormancy season is in the spring, right? The desert heats up really quick in March and April. So that's when we cut back our Abetalon and our Sphaerosia. If you cut a Sphaerosia, a apricot mallow, hard in January or December, and it's too cold and it's too wet, you might lose that plant because genetically that plant doesn't want to grow at that time. It doesn't remember, even though it's only 150 miles away, it knows, it doesn't know that, right? So we wait till about March, April, till it starts to warm up, and then we can hack those desert plants really, really hard. So again, deadheading on this hummingbird sage is once these guys tend to get spent up, we'll take this entire stem and then cut it to the ground. If I want to redo my hummingbird sage, if it looks bad, if there's holes where I want to fill in, I'll cut it to the ground during the winter time. So December to February. This penstemon wants to flower during the spring. As this guy flowers and the flowers start to look poopy, they start to look kind of brown and start to fall off, I'll go in there, believe it or not, individually with these stems, and I'll grab individual stems, I'll follow them back to where there's no more flowers and it's just leaves, and I'll cut right there, and that's deadheading. We'll deadhead penstemons, and if you do that before everything sets seed, you can usually get 1 or 2 more rounds, even more than that, of flowers. But if you want to shape a penstemon, right, if it doesn't look good, being a coastal sage scrub plant, we can cut this guy back during the winter. You could easily take a Penstemon that you don't like how it looks right now and cut it back by half. This is the perfect time to cut it down. Not down, you actually cut it kind of in from about 3 feet wide to about 6 inches wide, 12 inches wide. On the Snapdragon, we can lightly cut this plant any time of year. And if we want to prune this plant hard, fortunately, we can do it any time of year too. But like almost all of our plants, the best time is winter and spring to cut this guy hard. Here, they're just shaping it every month or two just to keep it that size. Deer grass, the best way to do this is by rake. If you have annual old kind of gray brown growth, we can rake that out of there. Or if you want to take the whole plant to the ground, we can take it back. Best time of year, winter and spring, when the plant's reemerging and it wants to grow, replicating a fire. Cenotes hanging point, being a cenotes, we can take 10% of this plant and just prune it anytime. But if I really want to take this cenotes back from 6 feet wide to about 2 feet wide, I want to do it after it flowers. And I'm going to wait till the threat of rain has passed. So about March, April is the best time before it gets too hot, before it gets too dry. And now the dry season, this is June through October. So this is after the dry season. Hopefully you're still watering twice a month, and that keeps your plants super active. Almost all of them will look a lot better than they do in native nature. So at this time, our sages have flowered. And if you guys want, you can remove those flowers. Remember, we're not cutting the plant, we're just cutting the flower. So you can do deadheading or even removing of just these dead stems any time of year. And you'd be amazed at how quickly and how fast these gardens clean up once you just remove some of this dead stuff. I like to leave a few of them up for the birds, or you can leave the stems on the side as mulch, and then the birds still have access to the seed right there. We're watering twice a month, maybe 3 times at the most, depending what kind of plants you have. If you have mugwort and hummingbird sage, you're probably watering 3 times a month. If you have flannel bush, manzanitas, and white sage, you're probably watering once to twice a month. And if we cut too hard into this sage at the wrong time, so August and September during the dry season, we might lose this plant. There's no signal on this plant that it wants to grow. And so cutting it too hard at that time, we may lose the plant. It's really easy to install and to maintain at this time of year any wetland plants, so riparian plants, tule, mugworts, sycamores, those guys that are kind of wet all year, or desert plants, because desert plants have access to water during the summer and they almost don't mind how hot and wet it gets during the summer. So those are really good to use during the summer too. And we can deadhead those, cut those back during the summer, no problem. And then a few more tips during the dry season. Let me see which ones apply to us. Let's see. If you're going to cut during the summer, which you shouldn't be, but if you're going to cut a lot during the summer, you want to be careful. If you cut too much, you could expose some of the stem. Imagine, you live in Oxnard and you have a sweatshirt all the time because it's so cold and your skin never sees the light of day. Then you go to Phoenix in August and you're wearing a t-shirt, you could get sunburned really fast. So opening up a plant too quickly to summer heat could burn the stems of plants. So be careful how much you're opening up during the summer. And I like to rinse my plants off once a month during the summer, especially if I have a drip system. This will clean off a lot of the dirt and the dust that a plant accumulates in our urban areas, right? By sidewalks and cars and smog and all that. You'd be surprised at how much accumulates, how clean a plant looks after just washing it off once a month. And if you guys have manzanitas or cenotes or even coffee berries, you guys will see this happening during the summer. So June to October, you'll see some of the leaves yellow, and that's natural. If you go into native nature, you will see the exact same thing happening. You'll see about 5-10% of the leaves starting to yellow. All you have to do is go up and kind of flick them and the leaves will fall right off, right? And that's smart. The plant does that because they know they're getting into the hot and dry season. And it's really smart for plants to drop a few leaves and stop growing. But what we do in landscapes is we see yellow leaves and then we thought, oh crap, I need to water. And we water more. And then we have hot weather. And then you start to create wet and humid conditions that the cenotes and manzanitas, they don't know what to do with. And so make sure that the yellowing of your leaves in summer, it's natural, right? There's a few occasions where if it's a young plant, you didn't give them enough water, that could happen, but almost always it's just the plant going semi-dormant for the year. So I'm gonna skip through here, these plants again, and I'm gonna go into irrigation in a second. Again, if you guys have any interest in coming to some of our free nursery where we give out free plants and you guys can work with us at the nursery or checking out any of these classes that we have, you can check out Eventbrite Samo Fund. And then we do have this free program that's starting in April on native plant horticulture, how we show you how to collect seed, how to germinate seed, how to do cuttings of native plants, how to do landscape maintenance in our park. And then I'll get into my irrigation section. So I'm gonna stop this. Any questions while I get to irrigation?
Why don't you go ahead and do your irrigation bit, and then we'll see what remains to be covered.
So I'm gonna take you guys. We have 20 minutes. I'm gonna go way too hardcore on this, and the reason I want to is because you guys can just close the talk if you want now. But listen to this. I'm just gonna recommend you guys water 2 to 3 times a month during the summer. And however long you water during the summer, I'm going to recommend you water double that during the winter if there's no rains. But that almost doesn't mean anything unless you guys can see a little bit of data or a little bit of how we came up with that, or how much can I tell how much to water, right? So let's agree on a few things. There's 3 ways. Can you see this? Celeste, can you see this little PDF?
It's a bit small for me to read, but I
Okay.
see it up there.
Let's see. Can you see that? You should be able to read that. It's just a map of California.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, cool. So let me see if I can make this bigger. Oh man, look at that. Antonio figuring out technology.
Good. Yeah, that's much better.
So here we go. So how much do we water native plants, right? And that's part of it. If you guys can get your plants in the ground during the winter, and the first 2 times that you water, this is super important. The first 2 times you water, remember you have a young plant, right? You don't have my mom's foot in a 24-inch box that's been there for 4 years. You guys have a young plant. It's 6 months old. It's 1 year old. It's ready to get the ground and get established. If you put a young plant in the ground from November to March, and the first time you water, you give it 2 gallons of water. That's a ton of water. And the second time you water, you give it 2 more gallons of water. That is a ton of water. If you guys can do that, and we have either good rain or you're watering on that system that I told you guys about, we're doing double as much water during the winter, and we're doing half of that during the summer, then you guys are good. During rainy seasons, your plants get established really fast during the winter if you give your plants water 2 gallons the first time, 2 gallons the second time. People have a hard time doing that. And it can be almost impossible on a slope. But apart from slopes, you can almost always do it if you have small plantings, or if you have big plantings, you just get the youngest or the newest person on the team just with the hose, and they get 2 gallons of water. So what we do is we literally take a hose, you take a garden hose, and you time how long it takes to get 2 gallons of water, right? So we get a 5-gallon bucket, you just turn the hose on, and you just sit there and you time it. And you just see how long it takes to fill up that 5-gallon bucket. And it usually takes, I think it takes about 40, 50 seconds in most, maybe a little bit shorter than that. Anyways, the average is about 10 to 15 gallons a minute for most hoses. So if I need to give my plant 2 gallons, I basically need to water for about 10 or 15 seconds. But the whole problem is your land won't take 2 gallons of water at one time. And so we usually fill up, when we plant, we fill up the little basin, or we have this little well where we plant. We usually fill that up 4 to 5 times. And if we can do that, we're getting about 2 gallons of water to the plant. Right, so that's the first time we plant, and we do that exact same thing the second time. Let me give you guys an example. We planted a lot of stuff before Halloween, the week before Halloween, but let's just call it Halloween. So November 1st. And those plants have been watered one time since, and that's it. So we planted, we gave them 2 gallons. We came back about 3 weeks later, gave them another 2 gallons, and we haven't touched those since. Why? Because they're in clay soil. We planted during the cold season, so the soil holds on to the water a lot better. There's less daylight, right? So even if it was hot, it's less hot than it would be in July. And then we had rain. And so we might not water those plants ever again. They might, I'm sorry, not ever again. We might just start watering them on that cycle starting April of twice a month, twice a month, twice a month. So how do we figure out how much to water? So there's 3 different systems that most people in California use. You can water by hand. You can water by overhead irrigation, which is those pop-up sprinklers, or you can water by drip. And drip is any way to get a small amount of water onto your plant. So this is a formula that was developed. I actually forget who developed this formula, but you guys can type in Sonoma County. Actually, let me see if I can show you this. So can you follow my back button on this? Let me see. Can you see that? Did I just change screens?
Yes.
Cool. So it's UC Master Gardener, Sonoma County, if you guys want this. And when I do the horticulture class, we go over this. So here is the formula. And this is not a Master Garden formula. That's just where I got it from. But this is how scientifically they figure out how much water to give something. So here we go. So this is our formula. Oh man, this looks complicated. It's not that complicated. So the first thing we do is figure out how much water something needs. We got to compare it to something. So what they use is warm season fescue. And that's just a non-native grass, and that can grow everywhere. That can grow in Michigan, it can grow in Florida, it can grow in Texas. As long as you give it water, it'll grow. So it's an easy plant to grow. And if we know how to grow that, then we can compare. We could say a white sage compared to a warm season fescue needs this much water. We know how much water we need to give a warm season fescue, non-native, in Fresno to make it happy in July. So it makes sense. We could compare how to make a white sage happy in Fresno in July. So let's look. The first one we're going to do is ETO. And all that is, I'm going to switch screens, is you look on this map. It's an ETO map of California. And I think I can make it bigger. There we go. And most of us live in this area right here. Area 4, 9, 6. Riverside's a little bit different, but most of us live right here. And all you do is find your zone here. So let's just stick with, I think we'll stick with 6 for here. So I'm looking at zone 6. And none of us, I don't think almost any of us, except for if it's drought, if there's a drought, there's no rain, there's no reason to water during the cold season, right? So I'm going to start looking at May and June. So this says I need 6 inches, 6.51 inches of water in zone 6 to make my warm fescue happy. Cool. That's very simple. As long as you identify which zone you live in, and boom, that's our ETO. Now, crop coefficiency. I need to figure out how water efficient, because I'm not doing fescue, I'm going to do white sage. So then I go to this list that UC Davis or UC Natural Resources have put together. This is a great list. And you can see Riverside, white sage needs low water. This is really cool though. I'm going to go back a screen and I'm going to look for Riverside, white sage, but instead of Riverside, I'm going to go, I'm going to say Oxnard. And in Oxnard, I have white sage right here, Salvia piana. And look at how it changes to the amount of water that it needs. And so now it needs very low. So in Riverside, it was low water. In Oxnard, it's very low. And that makes a huge difference for our formula. So now I know in Oxnard, zone 6, this is a very low water. So the crop coefficient means it's going to use a tiny amount of water. Next one is density. How dense? Do I have a row? Do I have row crops, just dozens and dozens of white sages? Or do I have 1 and 2 and it looks like a desert saguaro landscape? So I have to figure that out. And once I figure that out, I can assign a number to it. This is the, I'll go up right here to show you guys the density. Here it is. If you have low, sparse, cool. If it's average density, or if it's high density, if it's just row and row and row, just white sage right next to each other, you would put one of these numbers in. Cool. So now I know where I'm at. I'm in zone 6. I know I'm doing low water white sage. I know that it's very dense in exposure. Is it full sun? Is it shade? Is it windy? All those things go into account, and we can give those a number too. So I'm going to go back up here, and here's my exposure factor. Low, right? It's under shade. There's hardly any wind. Or high, it's on top of a mountain. And it's full sun, right? So you got to figure out what your exposure is, and you put that into your formula. And then all we do is take the square footage of that area. Let's say it's 500 square feet. And then irrigation efficiency is how much of the water that you put in your landscape actually gets to your plant. Overhead sprinklers are not that efficient. Drip system is super efficient, right? So we have different ways of assigning that number. 0.8 would be overhead, 0.9 or 0.95 would be drip system. Almost 95% of the water in a drip system will get to the plant or to the soil. And then this number right here, all this does is convert the inches to gallons, so we can know how many gallons of water we need. So that's my long way of saying, when I used to work at the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, I ran this for a bunch of different areas that I was in charge of maintaining. So Celeste, can you guys still see this? This is now a spreadsheet.
Yeah, we got it.
Okay, cool. You guys can have access to this if you want. You can take this. So look at all these stations, right? We had different valves that were watering different areas of the botanic garden. So all I'm going to do is take station 5. It's a beautiful spot. And you can see my description here. This is a raised bed. What did it have in it? It had Ceanothus maritimus, Ceanothus hirstiorum, astragalus, dudleas, arctostaphus. These are all, I think almost everyone would agree, these are ridiculously low, very low water plants. So zone 6, Santa Barbara, in August, if you're going to grow warm season fescue in Santa Barbara, you need 6.2 inches of water. But we're not doing warm fescue, right? But this just helps us compare. The crop coefficiency, because it's really low water, is 0.1. So I basically need 10% of the water that I would for warm fescue to keep these plants happy, right? 10%. The density, it was kind of dense. It wasn't like right up against each other, but there was plants next to each other. So it was kind of dense. Exposure was full sun. There was a little bit of wind up there. And then here's my square footage, 450 square feet. I add all of that up, and then I find out what kind of irrigation I have. These were micro sprays. So it's a type of drip, but it was a spray drip. And so the spray doesn't, if you guys seen these little micro sprays on drip, they don't give the water as efficiently as like drip, but it's super important. Here it is on drip. This is my biggest pet peeve with drip. People just turn the drip on and they don't understand how much water is coming out. There's a huge, so think of it this way. There's emitters, there's little droppers that give out half a gallon an hour, 1 gallon an hour, 2 gallons an hour, 4 gallons an hour. If someone told me that they were going to slap me half a time an hour compared to 1 time an hour compared to 4 times an hour, I would notice the difference of getting slapped 4 times an hour compared to half a time an hour. And my biggest pet peeve with drip is that people just set it and they don't know how much water is coming out. So there's a chance you're throwing 100 to 200% more water than you might think just because you're not paying attention to the emitters. So these jet sprays are giving out 30 gallons an hour. That's a ton of water. And we had 17 of them, right? So if we ran them all for an hour, you guys could do the math. That's 510 gallons coming from this system, right? So how do we know how many gallons this plant needs? So we run it through the formula, and here it is. This is the number we're looking for, 286, 286. That's how many gallons we need during August to keep this plant happy. So what does that mean for our system? We had a few options to run it. We could run it every 7 days. We could run it every 10 days, or we could run it twice a month. What we decided to do with this plants, because we wanted to keep them super, super bouncy and super happy, is we decided to run this system 10 times or every 10 days during the dry season. And all we ran it for was 11 minutes. Because we know if we were to put a cup under there and collect all the water that came from, if we ran that 3 times a month, that would equal 286 gallons of water. And that's all we're trying to deliver. So how do you do this so that's easy to calculate overhead or drip, but how do you do this with a hand watering? So hand watering, you have to figure out how much water comes out of your hose. So let's assume that 15 gallons comes out of a hose a minute. 15 gallons a minute times 10 minutes is 150 gallons. So I could get 150 gallons or basically half of this in 10 minutes. So I would recommend that you water during the summer this area by hand for 10 minutes twice a month. If you're watering an area that's 45 square feet for 10 minutes, it's really hard to overwater. It's really hard to get the water to penetrate, but it's a really nice, refreshing. Remember, your plants are standing in Disneyland and they're getting beat by sun, and all you're doing is giving them a mist. Now, when the rainy season comes and we don't have enough rain, or there's no rain coming from November and December, we take this number, the highest number. So it's usually just July or August, and we're going to double it. So yeah, it's July. So we're going to double it. So instead of 11, we're going to run this system twice a month during the rainy season. If we don't have any rain, we're going to run it for twice as long. So for 22 minutes. And usually we can't get 22 minutes in because it'll start running over. So we'll run it, for about 5 or 10 minutes. We'll turn it off, let the water come in, and then we'll come in again in an hour or two, water. And that way we start to replicate a heavier rain. And we only do that during the winter. If we haven't had any rain, we do that November to March if there's no rain. And then we kick back and do the 11 minutes during the dry season. I have a lot more to cover, but I think those are the basic list. And I want to see if anybody has any questions on stuff.
Awesome. Yeah. So since we're coming up close.
Sorry. No, I missed one thing. Sorry, Celeste, because here's sorry. I'm so sorry. Because here, it'll take me just because here is why it matters. Cool. So let me show you my spreadsheet again, Celeste.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I'm just going to switch. Now it's Gambelia, this is Galvesia, Ribes, Viburnifolium, Heuchera maxima, Eriophyllum. Cool. Just different plants, blah, blah, blah. So how much do we water? We're watering 11 minutes with this system. And that was actually, no, those are still microspace. My point is I could go up and down this spreadsheet and almost everything is going to be 10 to 15 minutes. For these micro sprays or drip. So here's a jet spray right here. Almost all of them were 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Right here's 12. And then the true drip, the spot spitter drips, I'm sorry, the overhead were about 30 to 45 minutes. And so the point is, if you have drip, if you have a low, it's giving out a small amount of water. So here's one that's higher. If you have a small amount of water, like the drips, we run those for about 10. All I tell, because people ask me this every week. They're, oh, how long do I run my drip system? What kind? You have a drip system? Cool. Run it for 10 to 15 minutes twice a month. You're good. It's really hard to kill something that way. Well, I have pop-up sprinklers, cool. Do it 30 to 45 minutes twice a month. It's really hard to kill something that way. And that's what I found. I could take you through these numbers for hours, but they almost all say the same thing. 30 to 45 minutes for the pop-up MP rotators, the lawn sprinklers, and 10 to 15 minutes for the drip irrigation twice a month, and you're gold. Okay, now we're ready.
Awesome. Yeah, so since we're coming up to the 3 o'clock hour, I want to make a couple announcements, and then we will stick around for those who can or want to stick around to answer some more questions. And if you didn't get your question answered and you have to go, you have Antonio's email, so you can bug him with that. It's not bugging him. He welcomes the questions, but it might take him a week to respond. So I just want to say thanks everybody so much for coming and being here this afternoon. I want to thank Antonio for being here and giving his maintenance class. I want to make a couple of announcements about upcoming events. We have a native plant identification workshop coming up through the Training Institute, and that's going to be really good. It's going to be interactive. You're going to have the chance to learn IDing and practice IDing native plants. And so we're going to be announcing that soon via our social media and on the Training Institute page. We're also going to be offering the California Naturalist certification course this spring. And so that's coming up it's going to be 10 Tuesday evenings from April 5th to June 7th. And we'll be announcing that soon as well. And then I'm going to drop a link in the chat right now for a survey. And so if y'all could click on that link and open it up and take this quick little feedback survey, we would appreciate you very much. And last thing from me is that you will get a follow-up email after this workshop today that just has a bunch of the resources that Antonio shared and his email, and our recording is going to go up on our YouTube channel, so you'll get a link to that too. So look for that follow-up email to come. And Antonio?
Yeah. So you have questions? Cool. I just want to put this graphic up because we're sponsoring, we're hosting, we're organizing this conference again. March, we're doing it March instead of June. We did it June last year. But if you guys are interested in learning about monarchs and milkweeds, and part of it, we're going to be giving away over 1,000 milkweed seed packets too. So you guys can scan it or just type in Southern California Monarch and Milkweed Conference and you'll find out more details.
Awesome. So yeah, check that out. Thanks everybody for being here. And if you can stick around and want to stick around, we can dive into some more questions. Antonio, how much longer do you have to stick around for questions?
Yeah, it's up to you. Celeste, I'll leave it up to you. I could do 15, 20 minutes, but I want to respect your time too. So I don't have anything better to do.
Okay, cool.
I'm just going to go work on plants.
Let's jump into some of these questions for the next up to 15 minutes or so. Yeah, so after all of that detailed info on irrigation, which what I gathered is you could do a bunch of math, but regardless, you should water for 10 to 15 minutes.
The point is that it's really hard. I mean, it's almost like becoming an alcoholic, and I know because I am one. It's really hard to become an alcoholic drinking a beer every 14 days, right? And that's what these light mistings are. These light waterings in the summer. It's really hard by drinking. Even if you drink 2 beers every 14 days, it's really hard. But it's when you start running your system every 2 days, drinking those beers every 2 days, that drip system every day for that's when we get into trouble with our plants. It's a little bit. Are we still recording this? Hopefully that didn't record.
Yeah, I can trim it though.
There you go. Thank you. It'll be a very short class when you do the recording.
So there was a question just about the difference in watering for newly planted plants as opposed to established ones.
Yes. So understand the difference is that our plants are not established until they go through a wet, rainy year. Either you provided it, which you can, hopefully, with your 2 gallons first and then your 2 gallons again, and planting them in the rainy season, right? Or if you plant them during the summer, they just have to go through a rainy season. And if you plant these big pots, I can't explain to you how long those plants take to get established. Those 5 gallons, 15 gallons, those 24-inch boxes, they take years to get established sometimes because they won't break out of their pots. So the early, the first year, if you can plant young plants, water 2 gallons once, wait 2 to 4 weeks, then water 2 gallons again. And then from there, get your formula. And from that formula, we're going to double whatever it is for the summer, right? And that's what we're going to water to get those plants established until we get the dry season. And then once we make it to April or May, we're good.
Awesome. And then what about for pots? How does this translate to natives that are in pots?
So it's out the door. There's a whole other talk, and I can do it real quick. Native plants are not native in pots. It's like a horse. I mean, they're still California natives, respectfully, but they're not. They don't act like natives. So it's like a horse. Like wild horses can fight on their own in the wild. They can find their own food, etc. But the second you put them in a cage or wherever people put horses, I don't know anything about horses, but you have to feed them. They get diseases. They get all sorts of stuff. So understand that will never be a wild horse. It will never be a truly native. And if you're cool with that, then all you have to do is give them a few things. The biggest thing that people forget is food. They can get their own food in native nature because they're in soil, their roots are deep, etc. But in a pot, they run out of food really fast. So if your native plants don't look good, it's probably because you haven't fed them any food. And they usually need food every 3 to 6 months. So they're kind of not native anymore. I don't recommend fertilizing native plants at all, unless it's with compost and unless it's something that you've cut hard. But the stuff in pots always needs food. It will always need food, unless you want it to look beat up from the feed up, and then it's fine. And then watering is a whole other issue. You have to figure out your watering. The way I treat watering in pots is like being a waiter or waitress in a restaurant. I used to be a waiter at Olive Garden. I used to love serving coffee and like waiting. When someone's drinking coffee, you don't want to give them coffee if their coffee cup is full. Usually you don't want to wait till their coffee cup is empty. Usually you want to warm that coffee up, especially if it's just black coffee, right in the middle, right? And so that's what we try to do. We don't want to give plants water when they're wet. We don't want to wait till they're true dry. So figure out how long it takes till your plants get to that state. And usually you can tell by weight. You can tell by measuring a coffee cup. You can pick a coffee cup and figure out if it's full, if it's empty, or if it's half. So you want to find the weight of your pots and your soils. And usually you can just lift them up, or if they're too heavy, you can tip them over. You can feel, yep, that guy's really light, or no way, he's way too heavy. And then you can water accordingly. But I love native plants and pots because they're so easy compared to, they look amazing. They look so good. You can keep them looking good all year instead of sometimes in the ground, they don't look so good.
Awesome. And then can the summer heat like get to a certain temperature to where it's considered too hot to water at all?
I think it would be, but if that's a good point. Yeah. If you're out at Riverside or even in like Pasadena, if it's past 100, you should either water early in the morning or late at night. It usually doesn't happen too much, but you are correct. Yes, if it's past 100, you would either want to do it early before the heat or later at night after the heat.
Okay, so let's move on a little to some of there was a couple like pest related questions that came in. So let's see this one. My goldenrod suffered from scale over the summer, and right now I'm leaving the stalks and seed heads to feed the birds. Should I cut them down? And if so, when?
Yeah, that'd be interesting to know why. Oh, is that a new plant or not? That would be interesting. But either way, cut it to the ground, and then you can leave the stems on the ground and the birds will pick through them. But I would even then push them away from your plants. You don't want that scale hanging around. Most people would say destroy that stuff. But if you want to feed the birds, then there's an argument there that you could leave it for the birds. I would leave it away from your plants though, and just cut it to the ground, and hopefully all the new stuff that comes up should be clean.
Cool. Awesome. What about milkweed that's full of aphids? Does that like prevent the monarchs from laying on it, or should anything be done?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, it doesn't disturb the monarchs. It doesn't hurt the caterpillars at all. I've only seen it like once, and I've been doing this over 15 years, where it actually hurts the health of the plant. I don't think there's anything to do with it, because when the aphids show up, you could have caterpillars too. The easiest way to get rid of the aphids is to spray them off, but you could also spray off the caterpillars. So knowing that they almost never hurt the plant, I would just leave them alone. That's the only plant that I would leave them alone on.
All right. Any other pest ones? Oh, does the Ceanothus Yankee Point get Ceanothus boars?
Boars. I'm not sure what Ceanothus boars are. Are those like the I know I've seen, I forget what they're called, like the galls, like where the stems get like insect galls in them and they kind of get fat in the stems. I don't know if that's what they're talking about. I'm not sure what a boar is though. I could look it up and see what
Yeah, I don't know.
I think almost any Ceanothus can get those galls. Yeah, I'm not even sure what a boar is. Oh, I see right here. A boar. Yeah, wait, that's a great question. I have no idea. I've worked with tons of Ceanothus, Yankee Point, Frosty Blue, Hirstiorum, all those. I've never, I've seen those, the galls before, but I've never seen, or I've never, maybe it's the same thing.
Okay, I don't know if Lonnie is still on and wants to provide any more info about what they're seeing in the Ceanothus. Let's see. There was a couple other questions about pruning. So, okay. Oh, one is it true to not to hard prune Salvia clevelandii
No,
in the winter?
no, that you can prune that in the winter, no problem. I just saw some this past weekend that were pruned beautifully. Yeah, I don't know if someone else said that or what. Yeah, as long as the plant has leaves on the stem. So if you go back to that sage video that we did, and you can look in that video, they said always cut back to a node. So cut back on the stem where there's a leaf coming up. As long as you see those leaves coming up, Clevelandii is just like any other woody. It's like Mellifera, Apiana. It's like all those. They're basically not the same plant, but they act the same.
Cool.
So no, I think that's fine. It's 100% cool to cut it during the winter.
Okay. What about, should you heavily cut back Boutilon palmeri? They add that it's very much in bloom right now.
Yeah. So all those desert plants, this best if you're gonna heavily cut them back, you can definitely cut them back. But I would wait till it gets a little warmer. So March, April, May, those are the best times to just, I wouldn't treat it like a fuchsia or Matella poppy, like cut it to the ground. But if sometimes they get like 6 feet tall, 7 feet tall, that time of year, March, April, May, cut it back to about 18 inches, like this, this little box, this little ball, and they'll take off.
Awesome. And then you were highlighting those 5 plants throughout the presentation. Do you recommend growing them from seed or by cutting, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a few of them you can't grow, I mean, you could grow by seed. That some of them are clones, and they're like navel oranges. Like to get a navel orange, you have to take a cutting from the tree and then copy the tree. So like the Yankee Point, you need to take a cutting of Yankee Point and to get the true Yankee Point. But yeah, you could grow all of them from seed. Just the Yankee Point one won't be exactly like it. You might not be able to tell the difference. It's always cheaper if you can find seed to do seed, but you can do deer grass from seed, or you can buy a deer grass and divide it. You could do Penstemon from cutting or from seed. They're really easy. You could do hummingbird sage. Hummingbird sage is one of the few plants that you could do all three. You could divide, you could do seed, or you could do cuttings. And Yankee Point, you could do cuttings, or if you don't mind that it's not a clone, you could do a seed of this.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Okay, well, I think that we will end it with this one more question, which is a compliment question from Rena. So they ask, how do you have such effective interpretive skills? And were you blessed with these skills at birth, or did you study interpretive skills formally?
I don't think I have any interpretive skills. That's really, I really appreciate that. I think that I've been around this world for a long time, and some of this stuff doesn't make sense to me, the way that people write it. And I don't get it. And water, it just doesn't make sense to me. But I get life, right? I don't want to even tell you about my life. You heard way too much already, but I've been around a lot, and I see the patterns in our native plants, and I see it in people. So I just think we're very, very similar. I mean, some of our plants, most of our plants sit in the hills waiting for rain for 6 or 7 months. That's amazing. That reminds me of my mom, as an immigrant coming from, Mexico and not seeing her family for years. Se aguanta uno, ¿verdad? So how I just see the similarities, and if we can know that hopefully, we're going to see our immigrant families again, what must it be like? You adapt, and what are those adaptations? And I just see that there's so many similarities between humans and California native plants. So I don't know, that makes sense to me to do it like that. I don't think I've ever really thought about it. I'm like, oh, damn. Come on, doesn't that make sense for the flowers? That it's like my cousin's going out to the Q Club in Oxnard, like, no, stop wearing that much makeup, stop. These flowers, it's too much flower. Anyways, so yeah, I appreciate that. I don't think that was even an answer, but whatever.
No, but actually it was, because I think inherently that making content relatable to folks is an interpretive technique. And so when you relate plants to humans and to things that we can all identify with as humans, it makes them easier for us to understand.
There it is, said like a poet.
So on that note, we'll wrap it up. But thanks everybody again for sticking around, getting your questions answered. And thank you, Antonio, for this awesome maintenance class this afternoon.
All right, Celeste, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
All right, everybody, have a great afternoon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.